Father's big secret exposed while trying on Mom's clothes. The morning unfolded as quietly as any other, with sunlight filtering through the curtains and casting soft patterns on the living room floor. Peter sat alone on the couch, flipping through a magazine in a way that suggested his mind was elsewhere. The house was still, a peaceful silence settling in for the first time in days. Sarah, his wife, had gone out to run errands, and their daughter, Lily, was spending the weekend with a friend. The house, usually filled with the sounds of life, now felt almost too quiet, as though it had paused just for him. Peter, in his mid-40s, was a man of simple pleasures, a calm demeanor, a dry sense of humor, and a deep love for his family. Life had become predictable over the years, with routine offering a certain kind of comfort. But recently, something had begun to unsettle him. A feeling lingered, faint but persistent, like an itch he couldn't reach. It wasn't dissatisfaction, not exactly. Rather, it was the growing sense that there was something about himself he had been ignoring, something that had remained hidden for far too long. As he sat there, the quiet seemed to draw his attention to the bedroom down the hall. Through the open doorway, the faint scent of Sarah's floral perfume lingered in the air, and he caught sight of a sliver of her wardrobe, neatly organized but left slightly ajar. He'd always admired Sarah's style. Her clothes were classic, elegant, and effortless. And yet, recently, Peter found himself intrigued by something he had never considered before, what it might be like to wear something of hers, to step into a world of softness and grace that seemed so foreign to him. The thought was unfamiliar, and perhaps even a little unsettling, but the curiosity was undeniable. He stood up from the couch, his movements slow but deliberate, as if he were moving closer to something both thrilling and unknown. The room seemed warmer, softer, as he crossed the threshold into the bedroom. The closet was open, and there, hanging in front of him, were Sarah's dresses, beautiful, flowing pieces in calming shades. His gaze fell on a lavender dress, delicate lace trimming the edges, and something inside him urged him forward. Peter hesitated, fingers hovering just above the fabric. It wasn't like him to do something so unexpected, yet there was a strange pull, a curiosity that refused to be ignored. Slowly, he took the dress from its hanger, his pulse quickening as he slipped it over his head. The fabric was soft against his skin, the lace cool to the touch. As he stood in front of the mirror, his heart raced with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The dress hung loosely on him, but for the first time in years, Peter felt an odd sense of comfort. It wasn't just about the clothes, it was something deeper, an acceptance of a side of himself he hadn't known was there. But then the sound of the front door creaking open jolted him from his thoughts. "Peter? Are you here?" Sarah's voice echoed through the house, breaking the stillness and sending panic rushing through his veins. He hadn't heard her car, hadn't expected her home so soon. He froze, his mind racing for a solution, a way to explain this, a way to make it disappear before she saw him like this. In a frantic blur, he fumbled with the zipper of the dress, but it caught, refusing to budge. His breath came faster as he glanced around the room for a hiding place, but before he could move, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her keys still clutched in her hand. Her eyes widened, taking in the sight of her husband standing in their bedroom, wearing her dress. The silence stretched unbearable as Sarah stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape. Finally, her voice broke through the tension, a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Peter, what is this?" Peter's face burned with embarrassment, his mind scrambling for an explanation, but the words felt weak, inadequate. I can explain," he stammered, his voice barely audible. Sarah's eyes searched his face, a look of uncertainty and hurt flickering in her expression. "Were you planning to tell me about this? Or was this something you'd been hiding?" Peter lowered his gaze, guilt rising in his chest. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I didn't know how to explain it. I was curious. I never thought it would go this far." A heavy silence settled between them, and Peter could feel the weight of Sarah's gaze, searching for answers he wasn't sure how to give. "Is this something you've been hiding from me for a long time?" she asked quietly. He shook his head, his voice soft. Not in the way you think. I never really thought about it until recently. It's just something I wanted to try. I didn't know it would feel like this. Like what? Sarah asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Like I'm finally being honest with myself. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and the relief they brought surprised him. It was as if the weight of years of unspoken feelings had lifted, even if only for a moment. But Sarah's face softened into something more complicated. Concern, perhaps even sadness, and Peter knew that this was only the beginning of a conversation neither of them had expected to have. The days following Sarah's discovery felt heavy, as though a cloud had settled over their home, thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Peter moved through each day like a man walking a tightrope, carefully balancing his desire to explore this new side of himself with the realization that he was risking everything he had with Sarah. The once easy conversations between them had become awkward, full of pauses, their eyes no longer meeting in the same comfortable way. Sarah's shock and confusion were palpable, and Peter found himself lost in the silence between them, uncertain of how to bridge the gap. In the evenings, as they sat at the dinner table, Peter could feel the weight of Sarah's gaze on him, the questions she had yet to ask. He wanted to explain, to tell her how much this part of him had unsettled him and yet brought him a peace he had never known, but the words never seemed right. Instead, he offered small, uncertain smiles and quiet nods, trying to ease the tension, but it only made him feel more distant from her. The guilt gnawed at him, and as much as he wanted to push forward and embrace this newfound part of himself, he knew he was hurting the person he loved the most. One evening, after another quiet meal, Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was soft but filled with an undercurrent of frustration. I just don't understand, Peter.
Why now?
Why didn't you tell me about this before? Peter looked down, struggling to find the words. Because I didn't know, Sarah. I never knew this part of me existed, and when it started to surface, I didn't know how to explain it to you. I never meant to keep it from you. It's hard to put into words. Are you saying you want to be someone else? Her voice cracked with emotion. I married you, Peter, not this. The pain in her words hit him like a punch. He felt the shame and confusion inside him grow, and the ache in his chest felt unbearable. I don't know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't have all the answers. I just know that this feels like a part of me I've never let myself explore. But I never wanted to hurt you. You mean everything to me. Sarah turned away, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. I need time, Peter. I don't know if I can accept this. I just need time to understand it, to understand you. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable, and Peter felt the weight of her words settle over him. Their once solid bond now seemed fragile, slipping through his fingers with every passing moment. He was torn between the pull to understand this new side of himself and the fear of losing the only family he had ever known. Yet, the more he tried to ignore it, the more that side of him seemed to demand attention. Days turned into weeks, and Peter found himself navigating a delicate dance. Every conversation with Sarah felt like stepping on fragile ground, unsure of where to place his words. He could see the hurt in her eyes, and he knew she didn't understand. Not yet. The more he tried to keep his exploration to himself, the more distant he became from her, and the emptier he felt inside. He couldn't continue to suppress this part of himself without losing something more important, his sense of truth. After another strained dinner, Peter finally broke the silence. Sarah, I know things haven't been easy between us, and I'm sorry. I never wanted it to come to this. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes cautious, but not closed off. I don't get it, Peter. It's like you're a different person. Where did this come from? Peter sighed, feeling the weight of her words. I think I need help figuring this out. Maybe seeing a therapist. I need to understand it better, not just for me, but for us. Sarah looked at him, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. Maybe that's a good idea. But Peter, I need you to understand it too. I can't be here if you don't even know what you're feeling. Peter nodded, a spark of hope igniting within him. At least she hadn't shut him down completely. He spent the rest of the evening searching for a therapist, eventually finding someone who specialized in gender identity and self-exploration. He made the appointment with a mix of apprehension and relief. For the first time in days, he felt like he was taking a step toward understanding for both of them. A week later, Peter found himself sitting in a cozy, warmly lit office, across from Dr. Mills, a middle-aged woman with kind, understanding eyes. She encouraged him to speak freely, and for the first time, he opened up completely, sharing everything, his confusion, the thrill he felt when dressing up, and the guilt he carried for hurting Sarah. Dr. Mills nodded thoughtfully. It sounds like you're grappling with two difficult realities. One is understanding yourself, and the other is understanding how this fits into your relationship. That's a lot to process, Peter. I feel like I'm being pulled in two directions, Peter admitted. I don't want to lose Sarah, but I don't want to lose myself either. It's like there are two versions of me, and I don't know how to reconcile them. Dr. Mills smiled gently. Self-discovery isn't easy, and relationships often shift as we do. It's okay to take things one step at a time. What matters is honesty, with yourself and with Sarah. It won't be easy, but it's a start. Reinvigorated by their conversation, Peter went home with a sense of purpose. He was determined to include Sarah in his journey rather than hiding this part of himself. The next weekend, he invited her for a walk in the park, hoping the calm atmosphere would make the conversation easier. Sarah, he began, choosing his words carefully, I saw a therapist. I think it's helping me understand what I'm feeling. I don't want to go through this alone. I want us to work through this together. She stopped walking, her gaze conflicted. I appreciate that, Peter. I do. But this is so outside what I ever imagined for us. I need to understand what this means for me, too. Their conversations stretched on, circling familiar questions, but there was a shift in the air, a small but significant change. While they still had a long road ahead, Peter felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time, they were truly talking, not avoiding the difficult truths. They were far from resolution, but there was the potential for something new, a possibility of healing, of understanding. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through this together. Over the next few weeks, Peter's journey of self-discovery deepened, with therapy sessions providing him the clarity and space to explore his feelings. At the same time, Sarah began confiding in her sister, Emma, struggling to make sense of the changes in Peter and their relationship. To his surprise, one evening, Emma reached out to him directly. Hey, Peter, she said, her voice gentle but laced with curiosity. Sarah told me a bit about what's been going on. I don't want to overstep, but if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Peter hesitated, surprised by the warmth in her offer. I didn't expect that. But thank you, Emma. Emma smiled knowingly, her eyes soft with understanding. I get it. Sometimes we go through things that surprise us too. I've had my own journey, and I'm happy to listen if you need someone who won't judge. Her words, full of compassion, gave Peter a sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, he felt like someone truly understood the confusion he was wrestling with. As their conversations continued, Peter began to feel more at ease with his emotions. Emma became a confidant who helped him navigate the ups and downs of his journey. With her encouragement, he even ventured out to buy clothes that reflected his authentic self, carefully stashing them away in a separate closet. Though these small acts of self-expression filled him with a sense of peace, they were not without their challenges. Every time Sarah's eyes flickered with uncertainty or hurt, guilt pricked at him, reminding him that his newfound joy was still a source of pain for her. One evening, Emma invited both of them to dinner, hoping to offer some space for open conversation. Sarah agreed, though her hesitation was evident. As the meal unfolded, the conversation remained polite but strained, until Emma, sensing the tension, gently broke the silence. Sarah, she asked, what's been the hardest part for you in all of this? Sarah's face softened with sadness. I feel like I don't even know who he is anymore. It's like I'm losing him. I'm scared he's changing so much that he won't be the person I married. Peter reached across the table, taking her hand with sincerity. I'm still me, Sarah. I just have a new side I'm learning to accept. I haven't changed, but I need to understand this part of me. I don't want to lose you, or us. Emma nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. Her words helped to soothe the tension, reminding them both that healing was a process. While the road ahead remained uncertain, this small moment of connection felt like a step in the right direction. Despite these glimmers of progress, not every day was easy. One evening, Sarah found a new dress Peter had bought and hung it in his closet. She hadn't known he was still buying clothing, and her discovery sparked a fierce argument. "Peter, this feels like you're hiding things from me again," Sarah said, frustration and hurt evident in her voice. Peter's heart sank, but he fought to explain himself. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm not hiding. This is just who I am, and I can't ignore it. I never wanted to keep things from you, but I understand if this is too much for you right now." The argument left them both emotionally drained, and Peter was left wondering if they could ever truly reconcile his desire for self-expression with the life they had built together. The uncertainty of their future felt heavier than ever. Yet, amidst the tension, Peter found unexpected support at work. Rob, a colleague, had noticed Peter's distracted demeanor and invited him for drinks one evening. After a few beers, Peter found himself opening up, revealing just a glimpse of the struggle he was facing. "You're doing your best, man," Rob said, offering a supportive smile. "Life doesn't always go according to plan, but you're trying to figure it out. If you ever need to talk, or just take a break from it all, I'm here." Though Peter hadn't shared everything with Rob, the small gesture of understanding gave him a sense of relief. It reminded him that there was still support to be found in unexpected places. Slowly, Peter began to rebuild his confidence, realizing that he could embrace his true self, even if it meant facing the difficult challenges that came with it. Sarah, too, began to notice the changes in Peter. One evening, she looked at him with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. "I see how much this means to you, Peter. I'm trying, but I don't know if I'll ever fully understand it. I don't want to lose you, though." Peter's heart swelled at her words. For the first time in a long while, there was a glimmer of hope. They spent the night talking openly, sharing their fears and desires for the future. Peter reassured her that he didn't want to replace their life together, but rather expand it, finding a balance that allowed them both to grow. Though their conversations didn't erase the pain or the confusion, they helped to lay the groundwork for a new chapter in their relationship. Emma continued to offer her unwavering support, and Rob remained a steady presence, each of them contributing to Peter's sense of belonging and self-acceptance. It was a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, there were people who cared and understood. And so, Peter continued his journey, one that was neither straightforward nor easy. But it was a journey of exploration, of becoming someone more honest, more open, and perhaps more true to himself than ever before. Though he still didn't have all the answers, he began to accept that life's beauty often lay in the unknown, in the spaces where he could freely explore the layers of his identity. The moment of truth came one crisp autumn evening when Sarah's parents invited them to a family gathering. These events had always been familiar, and Peter had always slipped into his usual role as Sarah's supportive partner, blending in seamlessly with her family. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Peter realized that he could no longer compartmentalize his life, hiding parts of himself just to keep everyone else comfortable. As he prepared for the gathering, Peter felt a quiet resolve. Over the past few months, his wardrobe had subtly shifted to reflect his true self, and tonight, he felt ready to take another step. He chose an outfit that blended masculine and feminine elements, tailored trousers paired with a soft, flowing blouse in muted tones, finished with simple, understated earrings. When Sarah saw him dressed, her face tightened with uncertainty. "Are you sure about this, Peter?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Peter reached for her hands, squeezing them gently. "I don't know how else to say this, Sarah, but this is who I am. I can't keep hiding parts of myself anymore, not from you, not from myself, and not even from your family. I need to know if they can accept me for who I truly am." This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he could no longer hide from his own truth. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but Peter knew that this, was the only way forward. And with that, he stepped into the unknown, ready to embrace the fullness of who he was. As Peter stood before Sarah in the quiet of their home, he saw the tears brimming in her eyes, her hands trembling. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice small and fragile. "But I'm terrified of what this is going to mean for us." Peter's chest tightened, a lump in his throat making it hard to speak. He reached out for her hands, his voice breaking through the tension. "I don't want to lose us either, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I have to be true to who I am." The family gathering was a whirlwind of noise and energy, but it felt like Peter was standing on the edge of a storm. The warmth of the room clashed with the coldness he felt inside, and every glance from Sarah's family felt like a weight on his chest. Sarah's mother was the first to notice, her smile faltering when she saw him. Her father's face tightened, a silent disapproval settling into his features. Peter could feel their judgment pressing in on him, but he stood firm, reminding himself that he deserved to be there, just as he was. The evening unfolded like a slow-motion dance of awkward silences and forced pleasantries. Conversations seemed to drift around him, never quite reaching him. Sarah's siblings exchanged puzzled glances, unsure how to navigate the shifting dynamics. Peter's resolve wavered only briefly before he excused himself to the kitchen, needing a moment to breathe. But Sarah's mother followed him. Her face was tight, the confusion clear in her furrowed brow. "Peter," she started, her voice low, almost accusing. "I don't understand. Why come here like this? This isn't the man we've known all these years." Peter took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking. "I understand this might be a shock, Mrs. Green. But this is me. A part of me I've kept hidden for far too long. I'm not asking for approval, just for your understanding." Her gaze faltered for a moment, and Peter saw the concern in her eyes shift to something like reluctant recognition. "I'm worried about Sarah," she confessed, glancing back toward her daughter, who was sitting quietly, her eyes fixed downward. "She doesn't deserve this upheaval." Peter's heart tightened, torn between his love for Sarah and the need to be authentic. "I love her more than anything," he said, his voice low but firm. "But pretending isn't an option anymore. I need to be who I am." The silence between them hung thick before Sarah's mother nodded slowly, her expression softening with a mix of acceptance and reluctance. "I hope you know what you're doing, Peter. For all our sakes." When Peter returned to the room, he could see the sadness in Sarah's eyes. Her struggle mirrored his own, but the space between them felt wider now than ever. He approached her quietly, his heart pounding. "Sarah, can we talk?" They found a secluded corner, where Peter faced her, the weight of his truth pressing heavily on both of them. "I know this has been hard for you," he said softly. "I don't have all the answers, but I know that I love you. I want us to build a life together, one where we can both be who we really are." Sarah looked at him, her eyes brimming with sorrow. "I love you too, Peter. But I feel like I'm losing the man I married. And it terrifies me." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, but he stayed composed. "I don't want to force you into anything, Sarah. I just want us to be honest with each other about what we need." A single tear fell from her cheek as she gave him a sad smile. "I thought I could handle this, Peter. But tonight, seeing everything unfold, I'm not sure anymore." They stood in the quiet, each wrestling with the realization that their paths were diverging. Peter knew there was no going back, not after embracing his identity, but the pain of losing Sarah lingered in his chest, sharp and raw. The drive home was silent. Both of them were lost in thought, the heavy weight of their unspoken feelings filling the car. When they reached their house, Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "I think we need some time apart, Peter, to figure out what we both need." Peter nodded, a wave of sadness and liberation washing over him. This journey had always been his to walk, he realized. And now, with Sarah stepping away, he had no choice but to continue forward, even if it meant doing so alone. As she walked inside without him, Peter stood on the doorstep, feeling the finality of their separation. He understood now that his life as he knew it was ending, but in its place, a new journey was beginning, one shaped by his own truth. He drew in a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next, knowing this was the moment where he truly began to live for himself. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of reflection and growth. The pain of losing Sarah was constant, a gnawing ache that never quite went away, but in the silence of solitude, Peter began to find himself. He joined a local LGBTQ+ support group, something he had avoided in the past out of fear of revealing too much. There, he found others who understood his struggles, who shared stories of loss, love, and self-acceptance. It was in that space that Peter began to understand that he wasn't as alone as he had once thought. Slowly, his life took on new rhythms. He rediscovered his passion for art, a love that had long been dormant. What had once been a private, secret hobby grew into a full expression of his identity. He began to experiment with his style, blending masculine and feminine elements into something uniquely his own. Peter even started sharing his work online, receiving messages from others who resonated with his journey, their support fueling his sense of belonging. Though Peter and Sarah stayed in touch over time, their paths were clearly no longer aligned. A few months after their separation, Sarah reached out, curious about the changes Peter had made. They met for coffee, sharing updates on their lives. The conversation was tender, filled with a sense of mutual respect for each other's growth. Though the pain of their separation still lingered, it was tempered by a newfound understanding of each other's journeys. Peter had learned that the path to authenticity wasn't linear, and it certainly wasn't easy. But as he sat there, surrounded by his new life, he realized that he had finally stepped into a version of himself that was truer than anything he had ever known. And, for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. In the end, Peter discovered that self-acceptance wasn't a singular moment, but an ongoing journey, a delicate balance between vulnerability and strength. He had learned that living authentically didn't require abandoning the past, but rather weaving it into a richer, fuller version of himself. Though the breakup had caused him immense pain, it had also become the turning point in his personal evolution, pushing him toward a life grounded in honesty and alignment with his true self. As he moved forward, a quiet confidence began to settle within Peter, not born of external validation, but nurtured from his own sense of worth. Walking home that evening, he realized that though his path was far from finished, he was no longer afraid to face it alone, stronger and more certain of who he was. Sitting by his bedroom window, Peter gazed out at the shimmering cityscape, a calm washing over him that had eluded him for so long. The journey he'd undergone, fraught with fear, heartache, and deep self-discovery, had reshaped him in ways he couldn't have anticipated. He had found a wellspring of resilience within himself, born from the acceptance of all the parts of him he had once kept hidden. Reflecting on the past months, Peter understood that he was no longer burdened by the expectations of others. He had carved out space for the freedom to be unapologetically himself. With Sarah, Peter came to cherish the beauty of love, even in its impermanence. The end of their relationship, though painful, had been a release, a necessary step for both of them to embark on lives more aligned with their individual needs. While their paths had separated, the mutual respect and understanding they had rediscovered provided a sense of closure. Peter would always hold the love they shared in his heart, but he accepted that the story of his love wasn't finished yet. The chapter that once seemed filled with regret had now become a vital part of his transformation. Looking ahead, Peter saw a future full of possibilities. He felt an inner pull to continue his artistic journey, to share his story in a way that might help others embrace their own truths. The connections he had made through his support group and his online community gave him a sense of purpose that extended far beyond himself. Through these interactions, Peter realized that stories of resilience and struggle had the power to create empathy and understanding, not just within himself, but in others who felt isolated or misunderstood. As he envisioned the future, a spark of excitement stirred within him. He didn't know exactly what was to come, but for the first time, he embraced the uncertainty with a sense of freedom. No longer shackled by secrecy or fear, Peter felt liberated to explore the full spectrum of his identity and desires. In time, perhaps he would meet someone who saw him as deeply as he had come to see himself. But for now, his journey was no longer about seeking validation or acceptance. It was about living fully, in wholeness and confidence, shaped by the struggles he had faced. Peter closed his journal, feeling a sense of peace settle in his chest. The city below seemed brighter, more alive with possibility. It was a world full of untold stories, new beginnings, and endless potential. As he turned off the light and sank into bed, he knew that whatever the future had in store, he was ready. He had walked through pain and emerged stronger, not unscarred, but undeniably himself. With that thought, Peter drifted into sleep, content with his past and open to the adventures waiting to unfold.